Okay, Mayor and Council, looks like we're back on again. So I left off at the fiscal year 21 budget is $800,000 plus dollars. Most of the budget is made up of restricted and designated funding. Rarely move dollars around to cover different service areas. And Grants Pass Police funds significantly help bridge the gap in crisis response programming that is generally unfunded elsewhere. October to December 2020 key statistics, emergency crisis response was 17 in total. Women's crisis support team responded 4 times to the Grants Pass Department of Public Safety, twice to the Oregon State Police, 3 times to Josephine County Sheriff's Office, and 4 times to medical care providers. The crisis line received 170 calls with domestic violence, and then 47 crisis calls regarding sexual assault issues and 7 regarding stalking. And as I mentioned earlier, I did provide you guys with a handout. Their handout is pretty detailed, and it can take you through a whole bunch of different data. I would just share with you all what's incredibly important about that data is the number, and then you compare that to what's reported. And we've talked about this time and time again, that domestic violence and sexual assault is one of the most underreported crimes in the United States, and that can clearly be noted by those numbers you have in front of you and the numbers that I have in front of me from Part 1 and Part 2 crime reporting, which are significantly different.
Vanessa, and then Rick.
In your experience over this last year, how has COVID exacerbated domestic violence crimes?
You know, I'm going to try my best not to sound dramatic because this is not supposed to sound that way. But I spoke the other day, Part 1 crimes of rape, sexual assault, we've seen an almost 40% reduction. And people might think that's a good number. That's a horrible number. It should be a lot higher than that. And then I also looked at some Part 2, all other sexual assault reporting crimes, and that's another decrease, which is problematic. We talked about sexual assault reporting programs. I'm working with Women's Crisis. I'm working with sexual assault response teams. And we need to figure out how to get more people through the front door of public safety to report these crimes. So we need to get survivors in the door. So we have to figure out how to break down the barrier. It's hard to do. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have to put survivors in the driver's seat. And if a survivor wants to at least report but doesn't want to move through with the report, we need to be more amenable to those type of crime reports. And that's what we're going to try to accommodate over the years to come. Every time we talk about removing a police officer, though, just hampers how we can push forward with another program similar to this. So it's a troubling number, to say the least.
Rick?
So Chief, when we're looking at those numbers up there, like the crisis response of 17 total, can we as a city only, let's say, we're responsible for 4 of those, whereas OSP takes 2 of them and the Sheriff's Department takes 3, but do they also contribute towards the program, or are we?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's all jurisdictional, so of course within the city limits, that's what we manage. But it's a great question as to, is the Oregon State Police providing dollars? Are the Josephine County Sheriffs providing dollars and medical providers providing dollars? You can look at it a couple of different ways. I would say no, but there are state grants that do give monies to Women's Crisis. Oregon State Police is a state-run organization, so you can kind of weigh it like that if you so choose. There are a lot of justice reinvestment funding out there, things of that sort, state grant funding for Women's Crisis. But from an apples-to-apples standpoint, the Josephine County Sheriff's Office is not providing dollars as in the same manner that we are.
Thank you.
DJ?
So I know that domestic crime is something you're particularly passionate about, and I admire that about you. I don't quite understand that the the Department of Public Safety funds significantly help bridge the gap in crisis response programming. I haven't fully understood that quite yet.
What that means is that if we took away $130,000, they may not be able to respond as much as they do. They would have to have maybe 12-hour staffing versus 24-hour staffing. They may not be able to respond in the field to the emergency room. They may have to deal with it over the phone. That in and of itself is a horrible way to deal with a survivor of sexual violence over the phone. So it's things like that. Of course, I'm not the expert on how women's crises operate. I just know that we utilize women's crisis often. If we did not utilize women's crisis, I do feel we would find a way to maintain that service. But it's difficult to identify, would the service level be the same? Do we use them? Yeah. Could we use them more? Yeah. And it's part of the education piece, Counselor, across the board. We have new police officers come and go. Some police officers are more interested in felonies and misdemeanors and car stops and vehicle pursuits. And sometimes you kind of get into your niche of enforcement. So it's that consistent conversation that we need to have with our partners and our police officers alike.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Rob?
So I'm looking at this sheet, and I wish I'd had it earlier and I could have looked at it, and maybe I wouldn't have to be asking this question. But in the total victim services, the top part of the sheet here. So when it says city residents known, 94, county residents known, 20. Okay, I don't understand what that means. Meaning that all these other numbers, you have a total number that came in is 933. Then it's contacts by phone, total number is 160. So what does 94 and 20 indicate?
I'm not looking at that data. That's not my data, that's their data. That was requested by council to help you kind of navigate through some of this. If it says 90 were city residents and 20 were county, I would assume, I saw.
It says there's 377 city, there's
I'm
94
sorry.
county, and then there's 20 from Cave Junction and 6 from Sunny Valley, Wolf Creek. So I would assume that 377 were city residents serviced, 94 were county, and then Cave Junction and Sunny Valley, Wolf Creek had their own areas to collect, so that you could add up county and Cave Junction, Sunny Wolf Creek to get the total 46 for the county.
But we have a total at the top of 933.
I think the reason why is because they're not always known. So 377 were known to be city residents. But of the total here, I think we can see that, roughly half are not known where their residence is.
And I think that's a great point. When you're dealing with survivors of sexual violence, one of the questions is not your residence typically. It's how do you get them the services they need to be healthy.
Other questions? I wanted to clarify something you said in response to Vanessa's question about, I think you said 40% fewer calls, and that was horrible. But that's because your assumption is that it's not that the rate of crime has gone down by 40%, but that we're actually receiving fewer reports.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Great point. Thank you.
Ready to go on? Yep. Public safety funding gap options, is that, okay, that wasn't also the chief? Okay.
This is just the continuation of some of the information that council had requested that we bring back. So the next portion is on business and occupation tax. The numbers you see in front of you is our current business tax structure, which was established in 1999. It has not been changed or increased since that time. The two EEs being employees, have a base of $50, and you're going to hear me refer to base several times in the next couple of slides. The 59% you see there is of all of the business tax registrations and renewals that we receive. 59% of all of those fall in this 1 to 2 employees category. And some of the slides will also discuss the impact of a potential alternate structure of the business taxes. Then what you see is as the number of employees increases for a business, then the cost per employee starts kind of high and then begins to reduce as you increase the number of employees for the business. So I did a total of 8 different analysis with our business registration renewal receipting data. The first bit of analysis that I did was looking at the CPI increase. I had the CPI information available for 2000, which is only 1 year after the 1999 implementation of the current tax structure, and it's about 50%. So applying a 50% increase to the base, which would take the base to $75, and then a 50% increase to the per employee count would raise an additional $141,600. And that would be, as far as an impact to each business, every single business would experience a 50% increase. Their base would go up, their per employee amount would go up, so the impact would be percentage-wise even across the board, whether you have 2 employees or whether you have 900 employees. The next item I did was to try and just hit a target of $100,000. If you were interested in us restructuring to add an additional $100,000 of business taxes, what that would look like is a $75 base and just a slight increase to the cost per employee. For any business over 30 employees, it's actually like it is exactly $2.40 per additional employee, and that slight increase is just changing that from $2.40 to $2.50. So that would be to reach a target of $100,000. I also did a target of $200,000, which again would be a $75 base fee, but then doubling the cost per employee. And so looking at the impact across the board, all the businesses that we have in the city of Grants Pass, those with 2 employees would see a $25 increase because that $50 base would move up to $75, but then they don't have an additional per employee cost. So that'd be a 50% increase for them. However, for a business with 900 employees, that would actually increase their total bill by $2,300, or about doubling their cost. So that'd be a 99% increase for a business with 900 employees. And also, as was presented as a potential option for the general fund gap, was that $300,000. That would be a base fee of $100 and also doubling the cost per employee. So the impact there would be a 100% increase to businesses with 2 employees and a 144% increase to businesses with 900 employees. Or a total cost of $3,400. I also took a look at several of our neighbors to see what their structures were like and how we compared to them. If we implemented Ashland's business tax fee, we could raise an additional $92,200. That's a $75 base fee, and then a flat $10 per additional employee. As far as the impacts go, the smaller businesses, like with 2 employees, would show a $25 increase. Those with employee count from 4 to 16 would actually show a decrease. However, any numbers over 16 would show increases all the way up to a business with 900 employees could see increased costs of $6,700 or a 279% increase.
Adam, that number 92 next to Ashland, that is what we would see if we just implemented their style? We'd see an increase in 92 too?
That's correct.
Okay. And any other questions right now? We're going kind of fast through this.
I have
Valerie.
a question. Yeah, I just have a question on the 900 employees. How many businesses do we have that have that many employees?
With that exact number of employees, we'd only have 1 to 2, but that's a range of anywhere from 30 employees to 900 employees, we have a 3% of all of our businesses fall into the 30 employees to 900 employees category. Yes.
Joel?
Great presentation. Does that apply to a nonprofit, or is that just for-profit?
I didn't look at that level of detail, and I do not recall the specific verbiage from the ordinance on that. So I apologize, I don't have the answer for that question off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
So, forgive me for being uninformed, but do nonprofits pay business tax, business license? Does this apply to them at all?
So, I don't know the answer specifically to that question, based on my remembrance of the figures that I read through in preparation for this presentation. It was mostly focused on the dollar amount, so I apologize. I don't have the answer to that specific question.
Because we have, like a big employer like Asante will say, they're nonprofit. I don't know if they even pay a business license fee or or if that would be even contained within your calculations here.
I can find out the answer to that.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. We're back to Roseburg or Cave Junction there, I believe.
So yes, if we were to implement Roseburg's specific structure, we could add an additional $157,000. That is a base fee of $150. And as far as the impact goes, those smaller businesses, that'd be a 200% increase for businesses with 1 or 2 employees. Anyone with 8 or more employees would actually see a decrease because there is no per employee additional cost. So after, it's just a flat $150 for everybody. And of course, that would mean that a company with 900 employees would see a $2,200 decrease, or about 94%. So that would go down tremendously for them. Cave Junction, we'd receive an additional $200,000 with a $150 base and a stepped decreasing cost per employee, similar to our own structure. It's just theirs would start at $5. Let's see, the 2 employees would see an increase of about 200%, and 3 to 10 employees would actually see increased cost, but anyone over that would show a decreased cost.
Somebody had a question down there?
Councilor Pell, nonprofits are specifically excluded from applicability for the business tax.
And I also just received a text from the customer service supervisor who just walked in the door. So Kimberly, thank you for sending me that information as well. Medford would show only an increase of $10,200. And I can go over that one if you would like me to.
Rob?
So are there any taxes and fees that do apply to nonprofits? I mean, as I remember, we have like 280 nonprofits or something like that in town. Maybe it's way bigger than that, I just off the top of my head. But are there any taxes and fees that apply to nonprofits?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Rick?
I believe when we have, like, on the water bill, transportation fees and things like that, that's about the only way we're able to generate money from the nonprofit.
The utility bills, I know the jail service fee that was attached to the utility bills in years past was one way of doing that, but we currently don't have an all-encompassing fee that also charges those nonprofits.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
So moving on to the drawdown of our internal PERS reserve. Right now what happens is that we have to pay PERS. There are actually 4 categories. There's Tier 1, Tier 2 General Service, Tier 1, Tier 2 Sworn. There's OPSERP General Service and OPSERP Sworn, and each of those have their own percentages that we have to pay to PERS based on an individual's salary. So right now, with this Tier 1, Tier 2 general service, that rate is 28.25% in FY21. So what we do is we charge the department 26.25%, and then at the moment, we're giving them a 2% discount, or taking that other 2% from our internal PERS reserve and drawing that balance down. Now, based on the number of employees that are in each of these categories, because it's certainly not even, that gives us about an average of 23.21% of employee salary gets paid to PERS. The lines you see here are a representation of the increase of the average tax rate. So this black line is the total amount, or the total, this is dollar amounts that we have to pay PERS. Looking at a option of fully drawing down our internal PERS reserve over the next 3 years versus drawing down that PERS reserve over the next 6 years gives us this orange and tealish line. As you see down here, if we were to increase the discount to each of the departments, that would reduce the cost to the departments. However, at the end of 3 years, which would be starting in 2025, there would be no more discount, and the departments would have to pay exactly what PERS is billing us, as opposed to letting that internal PERS reserve stretch out over 6 years. We have a less volatile increase over the years, which is what the internal PERS reserve was established to do, is instead of seeing these rather choppy jumps from year to year of, oh, now we have to go up 4%, we only need to increase by 2%, something like that. And just to emphasize that jump from FY24 to FY25, that would be a 33% increase to all departments. And because the general fund has the majority of employees, they would be very significantly impacted by that 33% increase in the amount they have to pay for PERS contributions.
Brian?
A couple slides ago, you showed that we are currently giving the discount to the departments of 2%. So I take that as we're currently already drawing it down by doing that.
That's correct.
Assuming that is like less than the rate of inflation or growth or whatever it's experiencing. So at that 2%, if it stayed there, how long until it would run out if it stayed where it's at now?
Yes, so because we have already started drawing down on the PERS reserve, that's going to be an annual conversation of how much interest did we earn to boost that internal PERS reserve, and then projecting out into the future as soon as we get information from PERS on how much they anticipate increasing their rates. It will really depend. Obviously, the less discount we provide, the longer the balance, the internal PERS reserve will last, and will provide a benefit to the departments for a longer amount of time. However, it'll be a much smaller benefit. So anything more than 3 years is only an educated guess.
Historically, has that fund seen larger growth than 2% per year?
No, definitely not.
Can you give us an idea of what that growth was or has been?
The discount that's provided is not necessarily related to growth at all. In the last 10 years, all of the departments have been contributing to this PERS reserve. They've been paying the portion to PERS that they needed to, but also setting aside an additional percent into this PERS reserve. So that's what's caused it to grow. And now we're starting to draw down on that. In previous slides, or not slides, in previous presentations, I've shown how the increase in the PERS cost has changed and how this plan has really smoothed that line so that all the departments receive more manageable increases per year instead of very volatile increases.
So you're anticipating no more than 3 years if we continue on this track of 2%?
No, that would just be council's discretion of, do you want me to make the PERS reserve last 3 years or 6 years? If you want me to make it last for 3 years, it will provide a much better benefit over the next 3 years, but then it will be gone. Versus, would you like me to make it last 6 years and provide a benefit for a longer period of time? Now, the numbers for that question are here. So if we draw down the existing PERS reserve in 3 years, then the general fund will see a benefit of almost $300,000 per year, which is a wonderful number, but again, that would mean that there would be no benefit after 3 years. It would be fully liquidated at that point. So it's basically the benefits and disadvantages are, yes, it could absolutely save money over the next levy term if 3 years is passed, but after that, then the departments would see a 33% increase in their PERS contribution costs.
Rick?
So Adam, is it state or federal regulations limit what investments that reserve fund can be put into? Because I believe the last time we heard was maybe bringing 1% return, or is it even doing that?
I think it's got between 1 and 2. 1.5 is about accurate. However, that number has gone down because of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, there are state requirements that dictate that we cannot invest our funds in very risky investments. Therefore, our returns are going to be much lower. That was one of the items that made the employer incentive fund an attractive option for us, because they can invest in riskier investments and get a better return. That plus the 25% match would have been an even better return for the city, but at the same time, doing so also would have run us the risk of potentially losing all of that if the market were to tank.
Thank you.
Joel, then Valerie?
The other thing, though, that I look at, it's really not very sensitive to you could double or triple that interest rate, and it really wouldn't make a whole lot of difference on the numbers.
Very slight.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Valerie, then
Yeah,
Vanessa?
my question was basically tier 1, tier 2, understanding these categories. Tier 1, tier 2, general, is that tier 1, tier 2 sworn, is that police? I mean, I'm just kind of wondering about that, and what OPSRP stands for, which is obviously a lower rate. So that's what I was trying to find out, and then wondering how long tier 1 and tier 2, because obviously tier 1 and tier 2 people were given more. So as those age out, the costs to PERS, I would think, would be less too. Is that correct?
Yes, the tier 1, tier 2 is a category of employees established by PERS. The benefits that they receive are greater than those benefits promised to the OPSERT group. And I apologize, I don't know the exact meaning of the acronym. It'd be Oregon Pension Savings Retirement Plan, I believe is what it is. With that, the number of employees that we have at the City of Grants Pass that are in the tier 1, tier 2 category, we anticipate that to decrease as retirements happen. And a greater percentage of our employees will be in the OPSERT group. Now, exactly the speed that will be, I would need to know everybody's planned retirement date. And that we only have that about 1 to 2 years max whenever employees start bringing that information. So that is a difficult number to project as it goes forward, but that is part of the analysis, is anticipating that groups at that higher percentage will become a smaller proportion of the city's contributions to PERS.
Vanessa?
For your slide with the 3-year and 6-year PERS reserve, does that include the employer incentive account? Is that the full PERS reserve?
So the employer incentive account was an option that we could have gone with, but we were put on the waiting list, and now we're even further down the waiting list. So based on my knowledge of the funding that is available for that program, I would not anticipate seeing any benefit from that program going forward. So that's kind of no longer an option for the city.
Okay, so to confirm, this is the full PERS reserve that we're talking, the 3 years and 6 years, this is correct?
This is what the city has built up, and we are now drawing down. These are all funds that we hold within our bank accounts.
Okay, I just want to ensure that I know that we were kind of holding some of the employer incentive account back in anticipation of that state grant, so I just want to confirm that's not being done with this calculation, the 3-year versus 6 years analysis?
That's correct. That has been eliminated from the analysis. The 2% the 2% discount we're giving in FY21 was intentionally made small so that we could have as much funds as possible to contribute to that employer incentive fund. But now that that's not a very possible option, now we can go back to offering more substantial discounts to the departments.
Thank you.
Rick?
So Adam, if the city wanted to engage in riskier investments to have a return, by state law, they can't do it. And of course, any money coming in that would be commingled and have to comply with those regulations. So the only way to invest in riskier returns would be if we had benefactors that really wanted to contribute to the city, and they would set up a separate fund and do the investment and then hand the money to the city. Would that be the only way you could engage in, not you personally, but the city could benefit from a riskier investment?
I would have to dive into that specific option in much greater detail. The other option would be that the city could take the internal PERS reserve that we have and invest it in a side account with PERS, hoping to get the projected 7.2% interest that they can earn on our behalf. But that riskier investment does open us up to potentially losing more of that.
Okay, thank you.
So yes, to answer your question, there is a way that we could make those funds earn more interest, but there's risk involved with that.
Valerie?
I'm just looking at the 33%, so I just want to analyze what you're saying here, is that if we continue with the orange is a 3-year, correct? The blue is the 6-year. So the blue is what we're currently doing now. We are currently diving into to the reserve, and we go for the 6 years, then that blue line represents that, and there would not be a benefit, an annual year benefit. Am I correct?
So as far as the comparison of the 33%, and I had it in the slide but didn't say it out loud, that increase from FY24 to FY25 would be either a 33% increase if we were to liquidate the entire internal PERS reserve in 3 years, or would only be a 14% increase. So there still would be annual increases. They would just be much less drastic from year to year. The blue line is not necessarily what we're doing now. Every single year is an opportunity to redo this analysis and determine how much of the internal PERS reserve to draw down on. Okay. So at the moment we're doing the 2%, but we also have the opportunity we could draw it all down in 1 year, or we could make it last 10 years. We have all of those options at the moment. So I just picked 3 years versus 6 years.
Okay, and I guess I'm just unclear, so I want a little bit more clarification. So you're saying, and it is actually on the next slide where that disadvantage is that you were talking about down at the bottom. So explain that to me again, that if we were to do that, then in fiscal year 25, there would be a 33% increase that they are putting into their PERS as opposed to a 14%. Is that correct?
That's correct. So from 24, or fiscal year 24, to fiscal year 25, that's a 33% increase. The 6-year option would only be an increase of 14% from 24 to 25.
And that would be without doing anything to the PERS?
That would be if we plan to draw down the internal PERS reserve in 6 years instead of in 3 years.
Okay. And there would be, and that's what we're kind of planning on right now, or what would be the savings if we went down through the 6 years? Or is there any savings?
That would not be additional savings. That's what I would do.
Okay.
If council was not having this discussion at all, I would plan for it to be drawn down in 6 years, just so that it would be as smooth an increase as possible for the departments.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies
Vanessa?
that.
And also I'm assuming this can be modified at any time. Hypothetically, the council could choose a 6-year option and in 2 years decide to change their mind, correct?
Yes, absolutely. It would be, yes, because every year we do this analysis again and say, okay, this is the fund balance that we have. How long should we make this last? And what benefit is that going to have for the departments?
Thank you.
Other questions? No? Thank you, Adam.
So that was the end of the presentation related to providing additional information that council had requested. And Karen, let me pull up the spreadsheet just to kind of go over what council has provided. So the sheet you have in front of you was just the tally of all of council's preferences, and then just a blank line if you wanted to use that for filling that out during conversation and discussion. We still do have the staff options 1, 2, and 3, but for today's discussion, just be able to see things a little bit better, I was going to hide those. I went through and tallied each person's opinions or preferences, and the number that you see here in column J is the number of counselors that agreed on a particular item, not necessarily the same exact dollar amount, but at least on a particular item. One thing I did for lodging tax is that this number was originally presented as a total, and I just split that into the original 2% and an additional 1%, for a total additional revenue of 282, just so that I can show, or I made the assumption that those who placed that as one of their preferences, that they at least agreed with the additional 188. Same thing with this Department of Public Safety fee. This was originally presented as 251, but I split that into the original amount and the additional amount. These items in green are some of the suggestions that council added to their presentations. That would be, this first one being the lodging tax, an additional 1% for a total of 3%, which would be total additional revenue of $282,000. The false alarm fee of $50 was also added. This was an item that had been presented to council as an option in the past. One interesting note related to this fee is that it is likely that the revenue from this fee would decrease as more people fixed their alarms. Anticipating that we're going to get that $60,000 every year for the next term of the levy I can't guarantee that with absolute certainty. That may be a great item to improve efficiency in that as people fix their false alarms, then you have officers responding to fewer calls. But the dollar savings on that, I can't promise you $1 on that. So that's why it was removed from this presentation, is only, or from the options that staff had provided to council, was just because the guaranteed number on that is a bit in question. Let's see, there were a couple of other changes that, or adjustments I had to make. This one, for instance, would be changing the CSO presence downtown to a 0.5 FTE instead of just freezing the entire position. Same thing for this dispatch service item and the municipal service worker. The downtown services, this one didn't match the dollar amount specifically, but I did want to put it in there to show that at least 4 counselors were interested in this, at least the $65,000 as an option. One item was put in as a negative dollar amount, which would actually imply spending more on that particular program, and I wasn't sure if that was the intent.
Yeah, that was the intent.
Okay.
Thank you. That's on the PAVE, in case anybody was curious. I felt that we should actually do much more of that than less of it.
Okay. So that is there as well. And Councilor Lovelace, I think you had entered this item as $38,000. That's the total savings to the fund that position is in,
Oh,
but
I
the
see.
savings to the general fund is $22,000. So I reduced that
Okay.
number down.
Yeah.
We also have some options that were added down at the bottom, such as integrate business advocate and grant writer position. reduce overtime by 15% in all departments, reduce overtime and administrative leave for all departments 25%, reduce OT in the Department of Public Safety by 10%, to reduce the 2 parks FTE, which is related to developing Dollar Mountain and Beacon Hill Park, and the school resource officers and school marshal to reduce those as well. Going through some of those, we would certainly need to do some more brainstorming and analysis on the savings that could be had for this business advocate and grant writer position, shifting duties and responsibilities. Those positions are in different departments, so that would take much further analysis if council was interested in something like that. On the overtime amounts, the analysis that would be required for those is looking at our true overtime costs for all departments and then identifying how much benefit would actually be for the general fund. The 2 parks FTE, I didn't highlight that one red because that was the $162,000 that was presented to council related to those parks. And the school resource officer, the school actually pays for 2/3 of the school resource officers, and the school marshal time, we bill 100% for that. So yes, that is an expenditure of the city, but we receive 100% of the school marshal time back and 2/3 of the school resource officers back. So as far as the dollar amounts that were suggested, all of those would require further analysis if council was interested. And then just to go back to column J, there 4, which is the majority, is highlighted in a light green just to show that a majority were in favor of this option. Those with 5 and 6 is a stronger majority based on the information that we received back. So what I have in column H and column I is those options that had a strong majority and or those options that had at least a majority. So with that, council has identified and expressed agreement on either $800,000 or $1.1 million to kind of start off the conversation on what other areas and service level reductions we might need to discuss and for you to agree on as council.
So Adam, could you repeat that last sentence? How much did we already agree on?
Those with a strong majority, which would be 5 or 6 councilors agreeing, at least on the activity, not necessarily the dollar amount, but on the activity, was $827,986. If you were to add up all of the items where there was just a simple majority, that totaled $1,159,703. I put those there as a potential starting point per your comfort level.
Okay.
And also would like to open it up to Aaron and or the mayor as far as continuing discussion on this spreadsheet, this worksheet, and future discussion on these items.
Thanks, Adam. You have done a lot of work in a very short amount of
Yes,
time
thank you.
to assemble all this for us, I know. And thanks to the council members who are able to put together their end of it very quickly as well. I don't know, haven't even made a firm decision about whether I was going to participate or not, but I know I personally did not have time to turn it over quickly last week, as I was also working. So we have some more time to work on this. I think I was really pleased that you did all agree on so many different points. That gives us a great starting off point. I think for the purposes of time efficiency today, I want us to ask any questions of Adam and Aaron and see if we have further topics that we need more information on, similar to what was presented to us earlier, but refrain from getting too deep into the discussion on this topic today because we do have several other things that we need to move on to, and we'll come back to this next week. So with that being said, I'll just start working my way. Valerie and then Rob.
Yeah, I just have a quick question on the caveman pool, that 5 people, the $100,000, is that for the running of the pool? So that's not for any of the building, that is simply for the running of the pool once it's up and running? Okay, thank you.
Operational cost, yes.
Operational costs, okay, thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, so I'm not sure on the colors here that you have on this chart. Can you, like for instance, on line number 9, under De La Grange, there's 44,000 that's shaded differently. What does that mean?
94,000.
That one was to show that the potential cost savings for the reduction in that level of service is $88,000. Councilor De La Grange presented savings of $44,000 with the explanation of that position being reduced to an FTE, but half FTE. That one might require some further analysis to see if that's a viable option versus the entire FTE position. While that is one idea for a solution, that would require some additional planning to make sure that we could still provide the level of services that you're asking for, but only with an FTE.
So the tan shading is meant to indicate a difference in the council member's proposed number as opposed to what was on the original chart.
And that was also just a reference to me to bring those items up.
So in that particular case, he has counted De La Grange as one of the 3 council members favoring that idea, but noting with the tan that there's kind of a slightly different idea to that.
Yeah. That doesn't really make sense, though, if we go down to number 55, because there's the full amount, the 22,868, is also in tan 4 columns over. So I just don't follow why it's in tan down there if it's the full amount.
So
That's because it was my mistake. I had actually put in 38,000, which was before, it was the number that was to the left of it. So I understand I put in the wrong number on that one, correct?
Yeah. So it's not the same reason for everyone. That was just a note for
Oh,
me
thank
to
you.
go through the list and say I needed to bring up a specific point. You can see these little purple items. That means there's a comment in there. And that comment says it was originally entered as $38,111. The benefit to the general fund would only be $22,868. So it's just a flag to me to bring up for discussion.
So on the email that you sent us earlier today, we'll be able to see the little explanation there?
That's correct.
Awesome. Vanessa, did you have a question? Okay. Rick?
Adam, I can't thank you enough for doing this. This is a really fantastic spreadsheet, and I like the arrangement and everything you've done with it. I do have a question on number 9, again on the CSO, and we had our discussion before. Part of the dynamic that we had in there, I thought we had the CSO that was retiring, and we, the council, are considering hiring a private entity to do the ticketing downtown of parking. So would that 88,000 be the same person that retired from the CSO? And if we were to replace him, realizing take up those duties with the private parking service?
It's a great question, Counselor. It's actually an additional CSO. So we do have one CSO that has retired, and we do hope to bring in the parking management company to come in and hopefully zero that out. That's yet to be determined. But for the exercise to come up with these numbers, especially the 1.5 and the $2 million number, it would be a second CSO that would be lost. So that wouldn't be a freeze. That would be a reduction.
Okay, thank you.
DJ?
So yeah, just the caveman pool, I just want to be certain that if this was adopted, no caveman pool operations for 3 years. Is that effectively what that means?
That's correct.
Rob?
So I know that this discussion predated my time on the council here, and maybe this was already defined. But for new revenues, and people added the ideas of false alarm fee, and because it had been discussed prior. Can you tell me how do we define a false alarm? In other words, if a bad guy was shaking a door, set an alarm off, and then the police show up and the person's not there, is that considered a false alarm? If the person's video camera showed there was somebody there, I mean, how do you define a false alarm?
Yeah, this is just an opportunity to dig deeper into. Majority of alarms we go to are false, and it's typically the caller saying, hey, I made a mistake. So 8 times out of 10, it's the business and or the home saying, hey, sorry, I made a mistake. A lot of times when we investigate those kind of, if somebody's shaking the door at 3 a.m., we kind of don't consider that to be a false alarm.
So if that actually is close to accurate 80%, I just have to wonder about how much savings we actually would end up with if 8 and 10 are not even going to be considered false alarms. And then, as you say, Adam, that as we go along, we're probably going to clean it up some because, people are going to get their stuff together.
If I could just comment on that, it's actually 8 out of 10 are kind of diming themselves out. So you would initially see probably some revenue, but hopefully over time, we would all learn to be a little bit better and understand that a false alarm is bringing a police officer or a firefighter to a location they don't need to be.
Councilor Pell, though, you are correct that we don't see this as a viable, sustainable revenue stream for the life of the levy, and that's why we pulled that from the current recommendations.
Other questions, Rick?
In that vein, is it erroneous for us to look at something this year as providing revenue, even though we realize in the long term it won't provide revenue? Because aren't we going to revisit this next year and see where our balances are anyhow? So is it not appropriate to still consider it as a source of income for this current year?
Well, I think looking at it more so from a source of efficiency than income, and ultimately getting the system working better would be really the main push for this.
Brian, then Joel.
I first wanted to thank Adam for putting this together. This is awesome. I know it took a lot of work and it's very easy to take in, so I really appreciate everything that you've done to get us information presented in this way. Yeah, no, I'll just stop there for now. I had something to say, but it's not a question.
Joel?
Well, I just want to echo Brian's thoughts, and I also want to compliment the city's administrative staff for coming up with as a tool, and the council for using this as a decision tool. And I also want to compliment people for thinking outside the box and not just looking at the things that were on this original spreadsheet and adding some additional ones. And at 4 or more, we're over halfway there. And that's very encouraging to me. I know we'll have to make some decisions, and we don't want a strict vote like that at this point in time to tell what we're going to fund and not fund, but it tells to me that it's working and we can get to where we need to be. So thank you.
Other questions? All right, in that case, I would propose that we all take a week to soak in this information. I don't know if we had I didn't hear any further requests from staff. Brian, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had a comment on maybe how to proceed from this. All the items that are 4 and above, sounds like we basically are going to agree on them, if not in dollar amount, at least in the idea. So if we were able to maybe, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but maybe if we could get this spreadsheet updated with all the 4 plus items taken off, maybe the ones that have no votes taken off, because those aren't going to fly from what I can tell. And then we're left with the remaining, ones that are kind of in the middle, just to kind of clean up what we're looking at, to kind of pare it down to give us a little bit more focus.
Okay. Other ideas? Rob?
Yeah, I agree with that. And rather than having them take them off, have them segregated so it's all there, but we can see what we've already decided on. Also, and I'm hoping that we were going to get into this today, but there's several entries for reducing overtime, and yet we've had no presentation about the overtime amounts. I mean, I have that data here with me. It's not complete, but I can hand it out if we needed to. But we're discussing, at least a few of us discussed overtime, and yet many of us might not know actually what the total of that is and what departments and so forth. So I think that that discussion hasn't even begun yet.
So one thing that I don't have the data in front of me either, but one thing related to overtime and why it was not slapped together in a hurried manner was that overtime also very much is affected by the fires that we've had several years of, and I wanted to make sure to put together a comprehensive impact to the city related to fires. So if I presented only the overtime hours and cost, but did not adjust that for the amount that got reduced by reimbursements for fire or COVID, that sort of thing, then it would be an incomplete analysis and presentation to council for your consideration. So that's the kind of extra detail that would need to be added to really look into overtime and understanding the impact that it would have, and also understanding the areas where it wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, overtime is, and the reason why it wasn't mentioned as an option is it really is a level of service. It's cutting overtime by 50%. It's cutting service level, and so we'd be looking at basically the same sheet again. If we're saying cut overtime by 50%, then we're saying, okay, if we're going to cut overtime by $500,000, then that's an additional $500,000 almost in service delivery we have to provide, because when it comes to public safety, the majority of overtime is there in public safety and police and fire, and public safety uses constant staffing levels. So whenever there's someone that's sick or someone that needs to take a vacation, or there's an emergency response or something that's above and beyond, that position needs to be filled because it's a constant staffing level. Say, take fire for an example. We have minimum service levels of 2 to an engine. So when one firefighter is sick, we need to fill that with overtime for another firefighter. Now, if we did not have minimum standards, and this is something we considered, if we had 3 to an engine, and someone was sick or on vacation, but the constant staffing level was 2 to an engine, we wouldn't need to fill that with overtime. But looking at those numbers, the hiring of additional firefighters in that situation would exceed the cost of the use of overtime with 2 to an engine. And so that's the overtime discussion would link directly to level of service.
Yeah, Rick and then Joel?
Adam, I was wondering if we could receive a copy of this, because I think this would be a good one to work with now. As I've said before, with new information, I can change my mind, so I can see as other counselors are recommending. I don't have a problem with modifying it, but I would like to rework the sheet. So if I could receive a working copy PDF or something, that'd be great. Thank you.
I think this one just went out in our email earlier this morning, and Councilor Fazer is also going to provide his information, so let's give a couple days for that to happen, but maybe prior to this weekend. Well, we have strategic planning, don't we? Is that, yeah, it's probably not reasonable for you to do it this week. Next week, we'll come back with an updated copy of this to work from. Joel?
I just had one quick comment, line item 66 in the spreadsheet where we have the Rogue River funds to cover the debt service. That would be a $500,000 shot, but that would be for 1 year only, so should we prorate that as $167,000 for the 3 years?
That $500,000 would actually be for 3 years, taking the remaining 1.5 and dividing that by 3.
Okay, good, okay.
Similar to the PERS conversation, and that's why it was in this category down here at the bottom with PERS, is yes, that would have a 3-year benefit to the general fund,
Okay.
but then after that, then you're seeing an even greater increase starting in FY25.
Sure, I understand that. But then the public safety building should be paid for by that time as well, though, correct? So that expense should go away as well in 3 years.
The debt service extends another 9 years, I believe.
Another 9 years, okay. Okay, so it just pays down that debt. So the debt would be reduced then after that.
So
Or-
the
or is it the same?
$500,000 would be taking that money out of the land and buildings fund and putting it back in the general fund, and then using that to pay the $512,000 of annual debt service. So that wouldn't be, part of that would be the principal payment, but it wouldn't be reducing or changing the payment schedule that we have
Okay, so it's not
set.
prepaying, it's just paying the original schedule.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Valerie?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, because that currently, that it goes under the public safety, it's in the public safety fee. You're just basically paying it for the 3 years, and then of course it'll show up the 4th year, you'll have to come up with the money to pay for that. And ongoing until the end of the debt service, which will be the 12 years. And there is actually there's some sort of balloon payment, if I'm not mistaken, due at that point in time as well.
That's correct. And if I could make a brief comment about the balloon payment, the way that that was structured was the debt service schedule was structured in such a way to have a minimal impact on the Department of Public Safety budget for as long as possible, with the anticipation that in year 7 or 8, we refinanced the entire loan to stretch that out even longer.
Okay.
Again, that does increase the total interest cost related to the loan,
Okay.
but it also limits the effect. It limits the annual effect of that debt service on the general fund. And that was something in a recent research project that I saw multiple times, is that what ended up being a balloon payment there in year 9 and 10 of the loan was presented as
Restructured.
multiple times as trying to reduce the immediate impact to the general fund.
Okay, and planning to restructure at that time and refinancing for.
Yes.
And I just had one more ask. I mean, can we sort this according to the 654321 on the spreadsheet? So
Well-
technically, we could go in and just hit sort and sort according to that column, and it would pull up all the 6s together, all the 5s together, all the 4s together. Would that work? I'm just thinking.
I can do that for you. There might be some formulas in here that are doing some fancy things that
Okay.
might not play very
Okay.
nicely with that.
Okay. I was just
But I can certainly do that. Right now, it's organized by some general categories. I know that keeping the internal service funds, it's a very different conversation than just parks or
I understand what
public
Council
safety.
Lovelace is talking about, and maybe what we can do is keep with those categories, but prioritize based on, so in category parks, of course, number 5, Caveman Pool will be first, and then second would be the Freeze Municipal Service Worker, which would go to, and so in each category, it would be prioritized.
Yep, that's absolutely possible.
That seems like a good way of handling it. Does anybody have further questions for Adam? Yeah, Rob.
Well, I guess to some degree in response to what Aaron was saying, but regarding overtime, Aaron pointed out in two firemen to an engine obviously is a situation where it'd be tough to cut overtime. I have difficulty getting my head around that in an organization with $1.2 million in overtime alone, that there aren't cuts that could be made. And I don't want to tell everyone in Adam's department how many number 2 pencils they have to have on their desk, but I also know that if we were to decide to mandate or give managers the job of cutting overtime by a certain percentage, it can be done. I mean, in an earlier part of my life, I actually oversaw a union and actually was the spokesman for the union of 140 people at one particular $100 million business. And I know that when managers do get that mandate, overtime benefits can actually be reduced, overtime hours, I should say, can be reduced when that's the focus and the filter that a manager looks through his scheduling with. If we don't put that focus or filter out there, then there'd be no point to, it'll never get done, which is, one of the reasons I also want to increase the PAVE budget, because I think that overtime is something that really needs to be looked at by possibly someone outside of this organization. But I understand the one small point that Aaron made about the officers or the firefighters on engine, but I actually would like to see the council interested in looking at overtime and ways that we could potentially reduce it. Even if we reduced it 10%, it's $120,000.
Rob, do you have a question for Adam?
So I guess my question, because I was responding to what Aaron said. My question is how do we get this overtime analysis done? Because Aaron indicated that it would require the council to
Rob, that
buy
was
into
going to be
that.
my next question. Do you have a question for Adam?
So how do we get that overtime analysis done, but he's going to have to ask Aaron?
So that does take a considerable amount of time for us to do that. As Adam was mentioning, it's sort of complicated, and you're right, there are some situations where there may be some overtime that could be cut without affecting or drastically affecting any kind of services, and then there's some that it would be difficult to manage without it. So, but because of the different categories, the different departments and divisions, it would take some time. And so a request like that would need to come, I would like it to come from the council as a whole, saying that the council is interested in that report, and then we can put that in as something to work on.
Does anybody have any further questions about this presentation for Adam? Joel?
So just following up on the overtime from Rob,
Can we hold off just about the things that have been presented here?
And so, on that overtime issue, do supervisors approve overtime? Right, you're correct. Employees work, and then the supervisors, and then they also make a decision to keep that overtime within their budget, is that correct? And so if their budget is cut, and then they still have the flexibility to order overtime, but they have to stay within that budget. So, that's what I thought. So that's a good thing. Okay, thank you.
On the topic of staying within the budget, another thing related to overtime is vacancies. While somebody is out, you are saving by not paying an employee their total compensation package, and in that same time, you may be paying overtime for somebody to fill in for them. So that's why it's not a simple analysis to do, and would take some time. But yes, we are all staying within the budgets that are approved.
Rick?
I guess I'd like to have, because of past experience, just a generalized discussion on overtime, but I'm hearing this is not the time and day to do it.
Well, I would like us to finish asking any questions about this spreadsheet, and then we can ask the council if there's an interest in pursuing a presentation on overtime, but I'm having trouble getting to that point.
Okay.
So does anybody have any questions for Adam regarding this spreadsheet? Thank you. All
And
right,
I'll just summarize by saying I will put these in order. They'll stay within their categories like public safety and parks, but they'll be in order of most consensus.
Thank you for all your help
And we'll get
today.
that out to you as soon as I can.
Adam, thank you. All right, moving along here, it sounds like there may be some interest in having staff do a presentation on overtime. Is that what I'm hearing? Rick?
So I just want to give a little history. Going way back when Joe Henner was the police chief, we had 5 vacant positions in policemen and staff. And he was in no hurry to fill those positions. And yet I said to Joe, I said, if you need somebody behind you to say, yes, I'm in favor of filling those positions, I said, you have my vote. And part of that reason being is, Adam, you already stated, when somebody is not there, either on vacation, retirement, or sick, or whatever, you have to fill that body. You have to fill that position. And if you have staff running around in the police cars in town on certain assignments, you have to have so many bodies on the ground. And what I perceived is by having those positions vacant, you increase the amount of overtime in order to fill those situations that you're confronted with. So I don't know how, I'm a little bit hesitant on how much staff time is taken to go in and do the overtime analysis, because I think in general, it's a known factor. And if I were to, in other words, if you look at $1 million worth of overtime, what would one more officer do to that $1 million? So I guess, and I don't know that it involves a lot of time to do that. I think you would even already have the answer. Thank you.
Just mapping that out and being able to accurately compare that this overtime happened because of a vacant position would take a substantial amount of time. One thing related to overtime would be that the total compensation package like your other benefits like health and dental, that does not change at all if you pay somebody overtime. So the total cost of an employee versus paying somebody to do a little overtime, in fact, in some cases, it very much differs on a position-to-position basis, but in some cases, you could actually see savings by paying somebody overtime instead of having an FTE, but then as the chief mentioned in his presentation, you run a higher risk of burnout, things like that. So all of those variables are what I have in mind in providing a quality analysis related to overtime for your consideration.
Would any of the council like to request that we put together an analysis of overtime? Rob?
I just, without specific oversight, and if it hasn't been in their focus for the last several years, it's hard for me to believe that every one of the $1.2 million in overtime was needed. I mean, very often a manager could say to have something done on a particular day, and if his focus is a little bit different, or her focus is a little bit different, that same work could be done over the next 2 or 3 days if it were within the normal business hours, if that was the mandate they were given. If they're not given the mandate to cut overtime, then there'd be no incentive to do it. So I just feel that that 1.2 million is not necessarily etched in stone as what is absolutely needed in every department in all cases.
And are you limiting this to the Department of Public Safety, or do you want your analysis to include other departments?
Well, Aaron happened to mention the fire, but also excluded any mention of police. So I'd actually like to see all the departments, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of really valid explanations where overtime is absolutely needed and cannot be avoided.
When you say all the departments, do you mean public safety or
Well,
other departments, including parks?
everything that we've been talking, well, I should say, how many departments are there? I'd like to see a report on overtime, and the majority of that, obviously, the lion's share of it is in public safety, which is the minimum that I would want to see because that's a big dollar amount. But I would also like to see the other departments.
Okay. Is anybody else interested in this? Brian?
I'm interested in this, and I appreciate what Rob's trying to get at. I feel like if staff goes through and takes a ton of time to make a presentation about this, I don't know that it's going to actually make it any more clear or make a decision any easier for us on this particular topic. It sounds like it could get very complicated and very convoluted, and there's a lot of factors. And so one of my line items was just reduced by 15% in all departments. I picked 15% because I felt like that was a very small amount that could be pretty easily attainable. You know, if we're talking about something like 50%, that would definitely need a huge analysis done. So I think there's like different, I don't know if we know exactly where we want to go with it yet, but I do think there can be savings to be had from overtime.
I guess what I'm trying to get at right now is what are we asking from staff? So is anybody else interested in having staff do an analysis on overtime? Yes.
I have a question for Adam. Have you performed an analysis or been privy otherwise to the information that Councilor Pell is asking for heretofore?
I have access to all of the data.
You have access to the data, but have you analyzed that data, or are you privy to the findings of that data?
Only at that top level of here's how much overtime there is. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was for, if it was avoidable, if it was reimbursed.
Sure.
That sort of thing.
Okay, and the follow-up question, probably not going to be able to answer, would be, if you haven't analyzed the data, would be, do you have an opinion about overtime and otherwise? That I want to know what your opinion is of what is being requested, and can you reference that to time that you have spent with the data?
So based on the data, and to mention your point about the 15%, a blanket 15% is certainly one way to do it. Depending on the division, they might only have 15 hours of overtime, which is a savings of $1,000. And maybe that, depending on the situation, was avoidable. Maybe. in which case you saved $1,000 versus a fire that was completely unavoidable and was reimbursed. It's hard to form an opinion myself without doing that full analysis. And I wouldn't want to present only one aspect of that for your consideration.
Because the reason I'm asking this is because I see merit in what Rob's asking, and I see merit in you simplifying the matter into just a percentage, let's knock it down. Because I think that it's reasonable to expect that we can reduce overtime without doing a full-fledged analysis of all overtime expenditures in the last fiscal year. So that's what I'm trying to get at, because I see merit in the request, but I don't know what the best way to go about doing it is.
And as far as a personal, I don't have a personal opinion. I have a personal experience with overtime being with the billing process. Yes, there is the idea that you can plan ahead and try and get things done early, but there are certainly things in the billing process that we get the information, we start the process, and then the printer breaks. And you have to wait for somebody to come fix the printer so that then you can complete the printing process to then mail out all of those bills. And that's an example that I know of personally with my office, that it feels very unavoidable in that case. And we certainly try and keep that to a minimum by making sure that we don't create errors or create issues with the folder or the printer or anything like that. But that's really my limited experience on overtime, is that it's times that are unavoidable for my staff.
Vanessa, did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of echo what Councilor Pell and De La Grange had said. I think one of my proposals is a reduction of overtime within the Department of Public Safety specifically. And I know you work solely with numbers, so I think if we wanted a real analysis of why the overtime is as high as it is, I think that would have to come from the hierarchy of each and every department, because specifically for public safety, a fire engine can respond to a carbon monoxide alarm 30 minutes before their shift is over, and an officer can conduct a routine traffic stop 5 minutes before their shift is over. That turns into a DUI, so every department is going to have something different. So I would like an analysis. I am requesting an analysis for the 10% overtime in the Department of Public Safety and what that number figure would be.
Rob?
I appreciate what Brian was saying, and I realize that to ask Adam for an analysis of what he feels is needed would essentially be putting him in the position of throwing all the other department heads under the bus, and he's not going to do that, and it's not even fair to him to put him in that situation. It's actually a situation, an evaluation that would have to come from higher than his level, or a PAVE person, because it's just not going to happen. We'll get an in-depth explanation, and no one's going to admit to having any unnecessary overtime. The reason they gave the overtime to begin with is because they thought it was necessary, or at least that's. So I think that my request to have Adam do an in-depth analysis is probably not going to bear any fruit, because that's not the position that he wants to be in for a lot of human reasons. So I'm more along the lines now, I guess, thinking about it, that I would just personally feel that the council should pick whatever percentage they feel is likely to still be workable, because we're not going to, it's already been justified in the department heads' minds, which is why they granted it to begin with. And they'll just reiterate it on paper and we'll spin our wheels. So I don't think there's any point to that particular analysis, but I like Brian's approach.
DJ?
Clarifying question, Rob, are we asking for all the departments, public work, finance, administration, public safety? Are we asking for all of that, or are we just talking about public safety here? Because I think what Vanessa's asked for is spot on, and I'm just wanting to clarify what exactly you're asking for.
Okay. At this point, we have a list of all overtime in all departments. It's already been prepared. I'd just like the council to be able to see that list. If we ask for the in-depth explanation, I'm sure that there'll be an in-depth explanation that has it all tied in a bow for us. Whether or not that's accurate, we have no way of knowing as outsiders, so to speak. So at least the council should just see the list of all the overtime to get an idea of the magnitude of it. If someone else wanted to go for in-depth explanation, I already know how that analysis will turn out, so I don't see the point in it. But I think the council should be aware of the dollar figure, and maybe we decide to do a percentage across the board.
Joel?
So addressing what you want, which is whether we should discuss it any more or not, or should have a staff do a presentation, I really don't need it. And the reason I don't need it is because in my experience, I applaud the need to look at cost centers and cut costs, but to limit a manager's tool to reduce costs somewhat arbitrarily without knowing the level of services that it affects is, I think, inappropriate for a body to do that. Let me give you an example. If I'm working for the U.S. Forest Service and I get a limitation of overtime, so what do I do when the fire breaks out? I say, well, we're at our limitation, folks. I'm sorry, we'll just leave the fire unstaffed. Or you got this budget request and I got 2 vacancies here. I don't have the people to do it. I got to have this other person do it, but I'm out of overtime, so I'm sorry, you won't get your budget report on time. Those levels of service were not known when they made that artificial limitation on a management tool to actually reduce costs. And so that's why I don't need a presentation on it, because I don't think we need to go there to save costs. If we want to save costs, we cut the total budget and let the managers do their job, and if they can manage it with overtime to reduce the cost, that's great. If they got some overtime they can eliminate, they need to do that and stay within that budget. But it would be hard for me to, so that's why I don't need a presentation. And I applaud the effort because, you know, looking at cost centers and reducing costs is a good way to go, and I know we're all pointed towards that direction, but I think we need to be careful in how we do that so that we don't hamstring the manager's hands.
Rick?
I like what Joel said, but also, Rob, you said you have some papers that indicate what the overtime is. I think it would be interesting for us to have that just so we're knowledgeable. But also, when you look at the whole picture, and I know it's hard to come up with compare apples and apples, Grants Pass is its own unique little town, so if you try and compare us to some other town, but I think if there was some way, and I don't know that there is, pick a few towns, 2 or 3 towns in Oregon that are similar in size, and see what percentage of overtime they run, and see whether we are within the ballpark. Because if we're trying to put a gauge out there and say we're doing a good job or not doing a good job, it'd be interesting. I don't want a formal study per se, but if we could come up with is the overtime, and there's so many factors in there, I don't even know if that's going to prove anything, but I don't know, just an idea. Thank you.
All right, I still don't have a clear understanding of where we're at. I feel like, Vanessa.
I made the request for a number figure for a 10% reduction in the Department of Public Safety overtime.
Okay,
And that's my input.
and is the council supportive of that?
I made the request for a number figure for 10% reduction in Department of Public Safety overtime. Not an analysis as to why that overtime was incurred, but just a number as to what that savings would be.
Is that not what's on our paper right here?
And
That's my calculations, and I'm not good at math, so don't trust that.
Okay, so that was a number that you didn't come up with, but you came up with.
Yeah, that's what I came up with.
Okay, because I thought
Which
that.
can be
perhaps
wildly
go-
different than the truth, so.
Perhaps
Okay.
going along with that, Rob apparently has access to some numbers about overtime. I assume that was something that was emailed to you, Rob?
Yeah, so it's just, you have this list, right? Or no? Maybe you don't. So there's a list of overtime in every department. I'm sure it's probably the touch of it's probably the click of a mouse on your computer to run this report again for us. I mean, you've probably seen this. I'm sure you probably generated this report for that matter.
If this is something that's emailed to the entire council, and then we
We would all
get a number of what it would cost to cut the public safety department overtime by 10%. Does that satisfy the council's questions for staff on this issue?
Yeah, we can provide council with the total cost of overtime in public safety and by division, and then also what a 10% reduction would represent monetarily.
Okay, I'm feeling that the majority
No,
is in
I'd
favor
like
of
to
that
say-
information. Rob?
So since it literally is no more work at all for Adam to run all the departments over time, it's just, again, the click of a different mouse stroke. I'd just like to see the report on every, that's what this report is, on every department, because it's really no more work. Right, it just,
I'm sorry, I'm not privy to what report Rob has,
Yeah.
so it's making it hard to,
well, it's just pay and overtime, that's all it is, for all
all
the employments,
departments?
and all the departments.
This report has already been put together?
Yeah,
So I think I just asked for that to be forwarded to all the council, along with a 10%, the cost estimate of 10% reduction in overtime for the Department of Public Safety.
so is that something you want me to do, or would you like Adam to do
No, I
that?
think we would like staff to
Okay.
do that and provide it to us before our next meeting on this topic, which I feel like we have beat the horse to death today. However, I'm just going to real quickly, in addition to that request, we are going to provide updated, if a counselor has not submitted yet information on the spreadsheet, or if anybody would like to make any amendments, to please get that turned into Erin as well. And actually, I'm going to propose, because we have a holiday, we have 2 days later this week of strategic planning and a holiday. It's bumping our workshop to next Tuesday, but staff will not really have time to prepare any of this before that. We're about to move on to the agenda setting here, but I'm going to propose that we just not talk about public safety next Tuesday, so that we have a whole extra week before we come back to this topic on January 25th. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Adam. Let's have a look at our agenda, future agenda here. And today, we have strategic planning coming up later this week, so our next workshop is Tuesday, and I think we've just all agreed to not talk about public safety, so we have interviewing some committee candidates. We have, I don't know what CUP for social service facilities is. Conditional use permit for, okay, and PAVE update on the PAVE for property management. Any suggestions for that date? Yes, DJ?
I think it might be appropriate to move the CUP for social services facilities out to a later date. I think that's correlated with the TUP that we're discussing, and I think we should flesh that out before we discuss the CUP issue.
I'm hearing a yes from Valerie, not from Brian. Okay, so we'll push CUP down the road.
Also, I'd like to gauge council's comfortability with putting the adult use issue on the 19th, since we've now evacuated 2 time-sinking topics out of that day.
Interest in that, yeah, Vanessa?
I have interest in that as well.
In moving the adult use forward from the 25th
Yes.
to the 19th? Is that, staff can handle that? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anything on other dates? Yes, Rob?
Yeah, I'd like to add a council discussion on making a request to the county commissioners to reconsider the location of the bus hub. We heard at our last council meeting that there's at least 180 people in town that are against the proposed location, and I don't think that council knew that and really understood many of the facts involved when the prior council made the recommendation to go with the county's proposal. So I'd like to have a discussion with the council to see if we want to make a new recommendation based on new information to request that the county reconsider the location of the bus hub.
Is there interest in a future workshop on the bus hub? I'm saying yes, yes. Maybe a no, but
It's a yes for me.
I saw several yeses, okay.
Mayor, would you like us to invite Scott Chansey and stuff for that presentation? Okay, we'll coordinate that with him.
I'm thinking yes. Some background would be good for those of us who are new to the council. Okay, other suggestions? Valerie?
I just have a question. I know that we put off the Rogue Retreat temporary shelter to January 20th. It was my understanding it was not going to be a public hearing, but that we had opened it up for written response and not a public hearing. So can you clarify that?
Yeah, that's correct. So the PH in front of it on the future agenda is mistaken, and it's probably more properly noted as a council action.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
So, Mark, a question on that. It's not clear in my mind, what exactly are we doing with that at our next meeting? Like, what's that going to look like?
Yeah, so what'll happen is, you know, the mayor will just open the meeting. Prior to that, the staff will provide the updated record to council with all the written submittals that will have come in between the deadlines that were set forth at the last meeting. And then at that point, council has a complete record and it will be time for deliberation. So it would really be the same as if we had done it all in one night, except public comment had just ended and it returns to the council for deliberation.
So the only public comment that we're going to be considering that night is coming in written form? That's, okay.
Of course, public comment that has already been received
Right.
to date, yes.
Thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, I brought this up last week, and it's with regards to Caveman Pool, and I know we were going to defer to strategic planning for that, which I agree with and understand, but I think that we're certainly going to be needing to have a discussion after strategic planning about that. I think strategic planning will be, you know, prioritizing it, but then we're going to have a subsequent discussion, so I think that should probably be on the agenda so we can not let that lag.
Okay. All right, moving on, we have a presentation about public restrooms. Looks like we have, does everybody need a brief break, or? Okay, we're going to take a quick break, take about 4 or 5 minutes. All right, we have Jason Kennedy here with a presentation about public restrooms.
Thank you, Mayor Bristol, members of the council. So our subject in summary is just to come back to you with some updated cost estimates for the construction and some potential maintenance costs of public restrooms. And the relationship to your council goals is maintain, operate, and expand your infrastructure to meet the community needs. So this is a follow-up presentation to November 9th, where we had come to you and talked about a couple of public restroom options, talked about what we were doing with our existing public restrooms, and how we had augmented those. We had installed at that time porta potties. The restroom at the Visitors Center had closed due to some extreme vandalism. We talked about the costs to having those porta potties installed, which was approximately about $42,000 per year. That was for 2 porta potties at 2 locations. So that was essentially doubling our restroom capacity downtown. And then we also talked about a couple of permanent public restroom installations that were more standalone, including a Portland Loo or a San Francisco style vandal-proof restroom. And then it was the question that was raised was, what is the cost of, say, a standalone, just a block building restroom, similar to what we construct in our parks? So we wanted to bring that back. We did talk about the cost of the porta potties and that they were costing more to operate than our fixed restrooms. At that time, council gave direction to continue with the porta potties, but we did reduce the quantity of the porta potties that were out there while still maintaining the high level of cleaning that we'd been subjecting them to because of the ongoing COVID crisis. At that time, we also reported that the contractor was about done replacing the access to the Visitor Center bathroom. So we did reopen that restroom, and it is open to visitors and merchants to the downtown through a key access, which is accessed through the Visitor Center. As you recall, this is the locations where we had placed the restrooms downtown and where we had asked whether you would like to consider for permanent restroom facilities. So a couple of stats. We have spent over $20,000 last year on cleaning and repairing the bathroom at the Visitors Center. It was quite involved, and that's because it had unrestricted public access. The porta potties, however, we're going to increase that cost to roughly $42,000. That's what we reported back in November. Now, we have since reduced the number of the porta potties from 4 to 2, so that cost is roughly half. It will only be about $21,000. And we have not seen any significant vandalism to those porta potties in that time. Previous issues, though, have included plumbing issues, vandalism, property damage, breaking sinks, mirrors, you name it. And the cost estimates in that $20,000 did include additional staffing and contracts for repairing that.
Vanessa?
You did say there was a reduction from 4 to 2.
That is correct. We reduced the number of porta potties. There were 2 at each location. We reduced that to 1 at each location.
What's the reasoning behind that?
That was council direction at the time. We had reopened the Visitor Center bathroom. And so with that addition of that bathroom, we reduced the quantity at the other 2 locations by 1 in order to save money.
Thank you.
What are the 2 locations?
The Grasshopper parking lot, right behind the Grasshopper parking lot, and right behind the Visitor Center, currently. So, moving forward to the new public restroom options, there were a few versions of public restrooms that have appeared in various cities around the country. That includes the Portland Loos, the San Francisco automatic public toilet, and then typical permanent installations, such as the ones that we install in the parks. Both the Portland Loos and the San Francisco automatic public toilets are fairly expensive to operate and also fairly expensive to install, and they all require a fair amount of maintenance and monitoring. As we look at the various types of structures, the one thing about, say, a block building one, once you're inside, you're completely hidden. And all of these other options, they are semi-open, especially around the bottom, so that you can see if somebody is in there. which helps to reduce the amount of vandalism that does occur. So as those of you that were on council previously, the Portland Loos, these are units that are open at the top and the bottom, which discourages illicit use. The base units, however, start at $90,000 to $100,000 and go up from there. So they are not an inexpensive option. Installation costs can more than double that cost, easily being $180,000 to $200,000 for a base unit. They are, however, very robust in design. They are hard to damage and vandalize. The maintenance costs can be varied, but you can go in there and hose it down quite easily. Similarly, the San Francisco has a similar option. These units, they have units. I should have clarified this. This says some units clean themselves after each use. That's a very expensive add-on that essentially after everybody leaves, the doors lock, the unit hoses itself down, and it doesn't reopen again for 5 minutes. I don't think that we would want to install an option like that. It sounds pretty maintenance intensive. They are an unknown cost, however. Wade did reach out to the company that is manufacturing these. They were hesitant to give a price because they traditionally work through a model where they get the franchise to run public businesses in a city, and they install them, operate them, maintain them. Grants Pass is probably not going to be super high on their list of places to start a restroom franchise, but that they didn't rule out selling it to us. However, they did not want to give us a price either. So then looking to a typical restroom such as what we install in the parks, these are typically stacked block construction. Standard fixtures, although we would recommend that we look for more vandal-resistant fixtures, no porcelain, something that just can't be broken. Typically, the one we just built near Fruitdale Park pickleball court, the construction was about $85,000, so kind of low. And then another $50,000 for infrastructure, so total cost in the $130 to $150 range. If we add some more really robust fixtures, that might push $175 or so. And what one of those may look like. So we just got this information from Parks. Typically, they are spending over $130,000 a year for maintenance of their restrooms. This is just so that we can look at what that would cost and where we would pay for that from if we were to install more public restrooms. There's going to have to be a maintenance cost that's going to be covered. And then typically, and this they didn't track it very well, but they are starting to, vandalism is over $4,000 to $15,000 per year per restroom, so reasonably significant costs to maintain those. So there is no call to action date. This really is, again, just to provide updated information. This is one of the projects in your urban renewal plan, and we are just hoping at some point to get direction from you on whether we keep moving forward with the installation of a new public restroom, potential locations where you would like to see that installed, and whether you would like to see a prefabricated unit such as a Portland Loo or a fabricated unit such as the stacked block version of restrooms.
Questions, Vanessa, then Rob?
What is the most common kind of vandalism we have experienced? Is it like graffiti on the walls, or is it clogging the toilets? What does it look like exactly?
It is everything across the board. I actually have a list. Unfortunately, it's in my notes, so you can't see it. Somebody flushed a very large fish down the toilet. It didn't go down and plugged up the toilet. Broke all the mirrors, catching people doing drugs. We have a lot of illicit drug use in the restrooms, so they will basically zone out, pass out on the floor, vomit, that kind of thing. Mirrors, just breaking the fixtures, tearing things off of walls. It's all across the board. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Rob, then Rick?
So going back a few slides on the installation cost of the Portland Loo,
Yeah.
I'm assuming, when you said installation costs could double, I'm assuming that's potentially for a place that doesn't have infrastructure, but to replace where there's already water and electric and so forth, then that's the installation is far, far, far less.
Absolutely. Yep.
So if we had, So the Portland Loo is, what, $90,000 to $100,000? And so if we wanted to do something like that downtown, like at the visitor center, if we're even going to have a visitor center, it's 90 to 100,000, and that's for one toilet or one person at a time.
That is correct.
So a pair of those would be needed at a minimum.
No, they're unisex, so you could have just one.
Okay. And then the installation would be far, far less than the 180.
Potentially, depending on how the plumbing is accessed, it could be that much, depending on where you could tie into the existing plumbing and water. But I wouldn't want to say it's going to be far less, but probably you could do it there for, 50 to 100,000.
At most, yeah. Thank you.
Rick?
Jason, you said that now that we've reduced from 4 to 2 porta potties, the cost would be about half?
Yeah.
And the usage in the winter would not probably be as high as it would be during the summer? So would that still suffice? And you were initially also indicating 2 cleanings per day.
Yep.
Is that necessary in the winter without the same usage, or do we have an opportunity to change some of that cost?
We might be able to. We have left the cleanings at 2 per day because of the COVID issues, just wanting to make sure that those bathrooms are sanitized. It's hard to say whether somebody has been in there or not been in there. So we would feel more comfortable until the COVID cycle ramps down, leaving that at 2 cleanings per day.
Okay. The other thing I like about the porta potties, basically you can't plug those toilets, and somebody else has to come along and clean it up where it's not us. Thank you.
Vanessa?
I know that this is an ongoing discussion from the 2020 council to the 2021. These options given in the presentation today, was that from the direction of the previous council? This isn't an inclusive, a whole list of all options available to our community for restrooms, correct?
These are the options that we know about. Otherwise, we could build a permanent structure, a larger structure that maybe houses some business function that would then also have toilets in it. But I think that these are the primary options. We could also just stay with porta potties as an option forever. And there's no capital expense, just ongoing maintenance expense for public restrooms.
Okay. I don't know, is this the time to make a recommendation, or is this just questioning?
I believe DJ has a question.
Okay, I'll hold off.
This inquiry might get into Brad's territory here a little bit, but I know there's been some discussion about remodeling the Owl parking lot. And I know we've also had discussions about positioning of restrooms in the Owl parking lot. Do you have any new or updated information on that plan, or what's intended for the Owl parking lot otherwise?
I don't think we do. We've been working on other things. It's still on the horizon.
Yeah.
And there was still talk of a plaza. And if you remember previously, and I didn't bring it with me this time, and I apologize, there was a slide with all of the city parking lots that were highlighted.
Yes.
Because all of those are really good potential options for placing a smaller style, not like a block building. A block building would really start consuming a lot of space. But one of these portable prefab units would fit much better in the parking lots. So all of those would be potential options.
Sure.
And could be included.
Thank you.
Valerie?
Yeah, my question was, with the porta potties, do those include washing stations? Is that something that comes with
They
them?
do. I neglected to mention that. So it's a porta potty and a hand washing station at those 2 locations.
Okay, thank you.
Rick?
The Board of Commissioners, in discussing the transit hub, have also included the conversation of a restroom there, and I don't know what impact that would have upon our discussion in the future. If I realize a lot of things are unknown out there, but that could be another factor that can be considered. Thank you.
DJ?
So per council's direction, I recall we had, it's like a keyed system, card system now at the visitor center, similar to what we have here at the City Hall building, is that correct?
Yeah.
Can you remark on how that's going so far? When did we implement that, and how's it going?
It was shortly after that November meeting, so December, January, it's only been a little bit over a month. As far as I know, it's going pretty well. the usage is not nearly as high as it used to be when it was just kind of open where you could come in the back door and go in the bathroom. So now that you have to come up and ask for a key to the attendant, the usage is down to what you would expect, where it's the people that are there doing business. So that part's working out, I think, much better.
Okay, given that, I would like to question the necessity of having a portable potty up next to that visitor center if we have a fully operational bathroom that seems to be working well.
Okay.
Joel?
Jason, do you know, you'll anticipate this question, so I bet you have it in reserve. The life cycle costs of the porta potties versus a permanent facility, including maintenance.
Of like the blue houses?
What I'm trying to get at is what is the added expense for going to a more appropriate statement for downtown in terms of the decor and that kind of thing? So what is the difference in life cycle costs between the porta potty and a more permanent?
I actually have not done that analysis.
Oh,
Mr.
Jason.
Councilor King,
Jason,
I know. I'm
we get
embarrassed
that?
now.
Can we get that from you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that a permanent installation would surpass, it would be a much lower life cycle cost in the long run, because your maintenance costs on the porta potties are a little bit high, and that you're paying somebody else to come in and pump it and dump it and all of that other stuff. But
you have higher maintenance
you have
costs.
zero capital up front. So
Right.
it would take a few years, but I suspect that the Portland Loo would surpass it.
Okay, well, it'd be interesting seeing the numbers because
Yep.
it is a higher capital investment, and but it probably has. I don't know if it has lower maintenance costs than the annual cost of the porta potties or not.
I can work on that math. Now that you put it out there, I'm going to have to do it even if you don't ask me to.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
Valerie?
Yeah, I was just going to comment, because right now, we're having more problems than we normally would. And I will just say that because like at the north end of town, you've got McDonald's, all those fast food places are not allowing people to use restrooms. And so that is, I think, exacerbated the problem now in this COVID world. It's because a lot of the areas before where people could go in and use the bathroom are not there. So, because this truly came to me last when we had the warming center that was open, and then during the day it was not open. And I do know that that part of town was just inundated with people trying to get in and use restrooms and that sort of thing. So I think that it's been exacerbated by it. But I do think that we should look at, I personally like the loo because I like the openness in the bottom. I think part of the problem that we have is that if people can hide, they're going to go in and hide. But if there's no way for them to hide, that the ultimate costs, it's up front, it's a big cost, but I think overall and long range, it's not as big a cost because you get that whole hidden thing where people just go in and do the drugs and whatever away. So that's just kind of my thought right now.
Yeah, Rick?
Jason, on the loo, that would be connected to sewer, and it would also have electricity in there as well?
It depends on our installation. If all we're powering is a light, it might just be solar. There's no real need for power in there.
So in the design of the loo, is it more, let's say, resistant to fish being put down the toilet or clothes or things that would plug it up and you would not have to call a plumber to undo the mess?
I can't answer that question.
Thank you.
Other questions? Brian?
It's not a question.
Okay. Do we have other questions? Do you have a question now? Okay.
Yeah, to circle back on the vandalism, what measures, if any, were taken to prevent or reduce that activity?
So the last time, and this, we've only been doing the public restrooms now for a very short period. It used to be under Brad's department and Laura Glover. What we have done is we put the lock on the bathrooms so that you have to get a key card access so it's not just unrestricted. What the attendants were doing, and I don't remember their names, forgive me, they were actually checking their restrooms every 15 minutes, which for, you know, a lady unattended, that's a little bit dangerous if they're in there doing illicit activities. So if we were going to have open public restrooms, we would probably want, concierge or somebody like that to come and check those to reduce the vandalism. I know in the parks, and Wendy can speak to this much better than I do, they still have a lot of vandalism issues related to that. They lock them up much earlier, trying to ensure that they're not left open at night so that people can get in there and do extensive damage. But without actually stationing somebody at the bathroom, it's really hard to prevent the vandalism.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Rob?
So Valerie made the statement, and I think you tended to agree about things being, the public restrooms being much worse now because of COVID and all the other closures of restrooms in a lot of the fast food places. So it just seems, when I think about what you said, it seems like in prior years, we didn't have anywhere near, this was not anywhere near this, the vandalism issue was nowhere near what it is now. So is that accurate to say that 17, 18, 19, and just this year, it's just out of control? Is that
I
accurate?
can't speak to that. I don't know if Brad can. I think it's been an ongoing issue. It maybe has been getting progressively worse. But Jeff Nelson, before Wendy, was always dealing with vandalism in the park's restrooms. And I think they just fixed it as a course of action without really mentioning it. And I think the same thing has been happening at the downtown center. And we were just now making you guys more aware of it. I can only speak for my very short term, but I do feel that it's been an ongoing issue. It definitely has gotten worse because there's been more people using it.
It has been an ongoing issue.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been there and has always existed.
Yeah.
All right, do we have suggestions about where the council would like to take this? DJ?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I would like to see some sort of official direction taken from council. This is something we've been working on for a while. Allow me to make a suggestion. I would like to either see eliminating the portable toilet from the visitor center or relocating it to another strategic place. That way we're still even. We can gauge service for constituents in the downtown area. But also I'm a fan of those loo design for many reasons stated here today. Maybe take a little bit more investigative step into availability and strategic placement of one of those units or two, and get staff working on that so we have a little bit of forward progress coming out of this meeting.
Brian?
I will second what DJ said.
Third.
Rob?
I was just saying.
Before I could agree with that, I'd have to go over one more time what the hours of the public restroom are that are in the visitor center. I think they're very limited. So if we remove that porta potty, we'd be having no bathroom at all downtown, probably after 3 o'clock every day. So I don't think that's a good idea. In general, I like the idea of it if the building was open longer. So I have concerns with that.
Vanessa?
I also am opposed to removing any public restrooms, specifically in our downtown area. We pride ourselves on being a tourist community. Tourists can't go home. They need somewhere to go to the bathroom. So if we want to bring people downtown, we have to have restrooms there. I would also like to mention a case study that I recently discovered where a city worked in cooperation with downtown businesses. This is in Geneva, Illinois. Geneva has a similar population to us of 21,000. What the city did was they contracted with downtown businesses where businesses offered their restrooms as public. So this was a voluntary cooperation between the city and the businesses. In the end of the case study, the businesses that stepped forward to accept the offer actually saw an immediate boost in business. So it could be kind of a win-win situation. I'd just like to make everybody aware of this information.
Thank you. Rick?
I like the comments that Vanessa and Rob made. I think we need to maintain the bathrooms that are down there now. And I would like to see, I want to say if there would be possible to do a 10-year life cycle cost for both of the bathrooms. What I'm real concerned, when it's a real bathroom, The maintenance on it is gonna just skyrocket because probably once a week you're gonna have to have a plumber come in and do it. And then I realize there's some additional cleaning costs that were occurring in the porta potties, but their cleaning costs may be cheaper than actually our cleaning costs. So, thank you.
DJ?
Just to clarify, Rob and Vanessa, what you said, I'd like to understand your desires. And what do you think about relocating the portable unit located next to the visitor center somewhere else? Increase the diversity and availability of units, but we still now have effectively 3 restrooms downtown if we consider the visitor center as one, whereas I see it as now we just have 2 because the portable unit is close proximity to the visitor center. Would you be willing to get behind something like that?
I think that's open to where it would be. I won't dismiss it. I'd like to figure out where it would be, but I like the placement of it right now. I was really strict this last year with my Christmas shopping, and I did almost all of it downtown. And I have a close family member with special needs, and they need quick access to a restroom. So having it strategically placed where people are is very important to me.
Is there something on this topic that we want to ask staff for more of, or do we want to put it on a Wednesday agenda? Valerie?
Well, I can hear what everybody's kind of saying. I kind of like the idea of the OWL parking lot getting one of the porta potties to just kind of stretch it out a little bit, because you're right. You know, it is nice to have one right there, but as you go further down, OWL parking lot, there's a lot of nighttime activity down there as well that there's not necessarily by the visitor center. So that would also kind of just break them out between the Grasshopper, downtown, and OWL parking lot. So that's just something to consider, having that. But I would really like to pursue specific costs for the Portland Loo and get more direct costs. And something to think about, and this just goes down to our shopping center. You know, our shopping center does not have any public bathrooms either, if you think about it. And maybe the people who own it might be willing to put something in the parking lot, like a parking. I mean, there are strategic places in our town that it would just be nice. I agree. I mean, I get older and I need to have a bathroom close to. So when you have to time what you do to the bathroom is just very uncomfortable. And I think that it is a service that should be provided. And I think the best cost that I see is cement buildings I don't like because people hide in them. And that's a problem. And that's where they have enough time to create the problem. Even going to the county courthouse, people camp out there in them right now, and that's closed. But if it's open at the bottom, you can tell if somebody's just camping out. And so you can push them along. So I would like to see this, you look at strategic locations in our town, I think that's important, and look at the costs of Portland Loo specifically. So.
Okay, so Valerie's asking for specific costs of the Portland Loo and identifying some strategic locations. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Vanessa, did you have something?
Can you please point on that map where the OWL parking lot is?
It's across from the Horny Goat.
Right there.
Down there.
Rob?
Just very briefly, I just want to respond to DJ. I would like to be able to embrace your idea of efficiency with that duplication of the porta potty there next to the, but if people kind of get a sense that, hey, there's a bathroom there, and they end up there at 3:01, now they're not happy, and they got to scramble to get to the next one. So because the hours are so limited there, removing it, I don't like the idea of that. You want people, yeah. Thank you.
Right. I think I have enough. I can pull together costs. We can come back with another presentation, do actual site costs so that we can evaluate the various locations where they might fit, where they might not fit. It may be that the OWL parking lot it doesn't work there because it takes up too many parking spots or it reduces maneuverability. So we'll come back with site-specific suggestions as well as costs at a future workshop.
Okay, and just to clarify, are we only asking him to look into downtown? Yes?
Can you clarify that question, please?
Well, I mean, we could put public restrooms in any number of locations around town. Are we asking Jason specifically to focus on the downtown area?
I understand, yes, please.
Okay.
So can I,
DJ, and then,
can I clarify a little bit more about direction? Perhaps investigating the availability of these units, opening up a discussion between the company that supplies them and et cetera.
Yep.
That help us narrow it down. Thank you, Jason.
Joel?
I thought Vanessa came up with a great idea, and, or actually she did her homework again. We don't have a lack of bathrooms downtown. We just have a lack of accessible bathrooms. And if we can pay for the maintenance of some bathrooms in some downtown businesses that would support the businesses and make them even more successful, and they would like that, without any capital investment and without any maintenance on our part, except to, well, we'd have to pay them to do that. I don't know if there would be an interest or not. Rob, you'd have a better idea than I do.
Yeah, Rob.
Like to respond to that. What most of you wouldn't know is that in the, most of these, or many of these historic buildings, they have bathrooms that are from 1800s, 1880, 1900s. I know Never Bum Steer, their bathroom door is probably 24 inches wide. In addition to which, you have to very often walk through somebody's back room, their desk, their stock room, et cetera. So it's really just for most of those historic buildings, unless they've been retrofitted fairly recently, forget about ADA compliant, it's just not practical for most business. Not to say that it's not a good idea, because there may be some that want to participate. I have one of the few historic buildings that actually has some accessibility. I still wouldn't want to invite excess numbers of people through it. But a lot of them, their bathrooms are not at all appropriate for the public, and the location of them in the building's not at all appropriate.
Well, I was just wondering if it was worth exploring the idea even more, you know, to that extent, to see if it was feasible. And if we did that, what form would that take?
Okay, I think in general, we probably want to involve our downtown merchants in this conversation. So I'm not sure, right now they are in the process of kind of forming a new organization. I'm not sure exactly if they have regular meetings, but we should talk about that, and maybe Vanessa would like to be a part of that and provide some more information, at least on paper, about that idea if you're not able to attend. Rob?
Yeah, I can
But
do that.
just so the council knows, this is not a new, that idea is not a new discussion, and it was actually discussed at one of the merchant meetings in council chambers last year, and what I just said is the conclusion for many of the businesses that are in the historic buildings. This is not something that's coming out of my head, that's the reality.
I would agree with that.
Further comment, Vanessa?
I do understand, Rob. I think if this even provided 2 or 3 more bathrooms in our downtown area, that could be greatly beneficial to the city with a really low cost.
Anybody else? Public restroom conversation? All right, thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Jason, for your time. And last on the agenda here, we just have Aaron speaking with us to touch on the council vacancy in Ward 3.
2 of them, so. Yeah, because I have the same thing. So
Yes, very brief presentation. Subject summary requesting council direction on advertising for the vacant Ward 3 position. Council had a couple questions, came back to you today with some answers for you. Here is an example of what the postcard type mailer could look like. Inspired to lead, Ward 3, City Council vacancy. Apply to be on the City Council of Grants Pass. The backside could look something like this. Answer yes to these questions and you qualify. My home is in Ward 3. I have resided in my home for at least 6 months. I am a registered voter. And it talks about where you can pick up an application, a deadline. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a postcard it's been recommended that we go for not just a postcard, because sometimes those things just get lost in the mail, but actually going to something a little bit bigger to where it actually stands out if we're going to go through this effort. So we're looking at potentially a 6.25 by 9 postcard. We'd be looking at approximately 4,325 pieces. Printing would cost $568, sorting $212, postage about $700. We would get to the 5 major carrier routes in that area and primarily get to most all of your Ward 3 constituents. Total cost, $1,481.
Thank you. How do we feel about this? Are you interested in pursuing postcard? Yeah, Brian?
Yeah, I think the cost is super modest, even less than I was expecting it to be, so I have no concerns with the cost to put those out. I could speak a little bit to the design of the back of the postcard, but I guess it would suffice. I had an idea of maybe in addition to a link to the application, there's probably enough room to put like a QR code on there so people could just snap it with their phone and make it super easy for them so they don't have to, you know, type in that long email or URL. But generally speaking, I think it's great.
Questions? Vanessa? Comments? Questions, comments?
Yeah, thank you for putting this together. I am in support of this and the cost. I think this is great. This is an investment into the next leader of this community on this body, so I support this.
Rob?
So I don't have a calculator out, but it's in the ballpark of 30 cents each. Is that right?
If I had my phone
Was
with
it
me,
30
I'd do
cents
it
a
really
piece,
quick.
roughly?
Maybe closer to 35, but yes,
Okay.
right around there.
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea. I think it's a reasonable attempt at execution. There probably should be something on there that just says if you're receiving this postcard, it's likely that your home is in Ward 3, because a lot of people have no idea where Ward 3 is or if they're in it or not. They might think that everybody in the city got a postcard, but it needs to say if you're receiving this postcard, you're likely in Ward 3, something like that. But I like it, yeah.
Yeah.
34 cents, Rob. Yeah, DJ.
Yeah, I think this is a good idea. Brian, a quick read code I think would be kind of a good idea for no effort whatsoever, just in the corner of the back of that postcard. I would also just like to make a plug really quick about the value of an information coordinator for this city, because guess who's handling this, creating this, distributing this, social media posts, you know, public broadcasting, et cetera, on our digital presence. That would be our information coordinator. So, but yeah, I think we should rock and roll with this.
Any other comments?
I'll just add that I think it's well worth it, like I said, for somebody who's going to be on there for a while. And so I agree with it. I'm not as into the QR code, but you guys are, and you use it, so whatever makes it the easiest. And I agree with Rob's statement that somewhere there should be a clarification that you received this because, and I say that because they're going to think everybody got it, and they're just going to toss it and say, oh, I'm not in Ward 3. No, you are. That's why you got it, is chances are.
Certainly.
So that's a good idea.
Yeah, Rick.
I'm on board with the comments that have been made. I think it's a good thing. And I think the modifications and responses like what Rob said are appropriate.
Well, I think this is within your spending authority, so do you need anything from us there?
Nope, just needed that general direction. We'll get on that, make those changes and get that notified.
Would you like us to select a deadline?
You want us, a deadline, how about give me parameters of like, put it out like 3 weeks after we mail it or 2 weeks after we mail it or something like that.
Suggestion, anybody? Rob?
So just to backtrack a little bit, we had also talked about the very, very low cost move of sending out an announcement with the January 28th water bill in that section. So I wouldn't want to forget about that because it would be really, really cheap to do. And then we talked about after the mailing went out, either one of those or both mailings, then we were going to have a deadline of whatever it was going to be. But I don't want to forget about the water bill insert as well, if it's going out right at the right time.
Vanessa?
I'd like to recommend a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks from once it's mailed.
Rick?
I think it's appropriate to put a deadline on here because otherwise people just put it aside and forget about it. The other thing is I think after receipt, if the deadline is like within 2 weeks, we're probably going to have a better response than put 3 weeks because then people just set it aside like they have too much time and don't have to think about it. So I think a shorter time span like 2 weeks would be preferable.
Rob?
So one thing to consider, I don't remember exactly with Every Door Direct Mail, but I know with some of the bulk mailings that I do, the post office has legally up to 5 days of it sitting in the post office doing nothing. So there's times when I'll send out a newsletter on the 30th and they get it the next day. There's other times when it doesn't go out for literally 5 days. And it really doesn't matter what season it is, it almost seems like it's random. So just, we need to consider that as well when we have the deadline.
I'm hearing overall maybe 3 weeks. That gives at least 2 weeks. Brian, good? Everybody good with that? 3 weeks or so after the mailing date?
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. All right. Oh, DJ?
Yeah, just one more, just very brief question. So the money that is going to pay for this, where's that come from?
So that's coming from your mayor-council budget. The mayor-council advertising budget is just an extra, it is in line with what it's for. It's for city council advertising. And
Sure.
You do have funds for that.
Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you.
I forgot about the adjustment to our agenda today. I was a little ready personally to go back to work, but we do have an executive session scheduled on the agenda now. So the council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of discussing, for the purpose of meeting with the city attorney regarding the rights and duties in current likely litigation. This was previously noticed.